in keeping with the heart and soul of climate issues, the INC Climate and Sustainability Committee honors and acknowledges that we meet on traditional and unceded territories of the Ute, the Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples. We also recognize the 48 contemporary indigenous tribes and nations who have historically called Colorado home. We pay our respects to elders, past and present and future, and to all those who have stewarded the land and water for generations. May this acknowledgement express our members' commitments to grow and deepen its relationship with the vibrant indigenous communities who continue to thrive and uphold their sacred relationship to this land. And I must admit, I got a chance to go to the powwow again last weekend for a short time, and I go almost every single year, and it's just lovely to hear the chants, see the dancers, and it's just a great time all around. I thought it was really important for those of us in a committee like this to realize, where do things start? How do things come about? And I know that so many things start in the legislature, and people have a good idea. They get it to a representative, it's being heard, and then what happens to that? And so tonight, I am just thrilled that we have some people here to share with all of us what they have done and what they continue to do, and how they're going to encourage us to get involved with them in what they're doing on certain issues that are in the legislature this year. So I would like to introduce, first of all, Suzanne, or Zan Jones. She serves as the executive director of the Boulder County nonprofit EcoCycle, one of the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit recyclers dedicated to innovating, implementing, and advocating for recycling, composting, and other zero waste efforts. Suzanne also recently finished 8 years of public service on the Boulder City Council from 2011 to 2019, the last 4 years as Boulder's mayor. Previously, Suzanne worked 16 years for the Wilderness Society, where she served as the Central Rockies Regional Director, leading coalition efforts to protect our nation's public lands. Before moving back to Colorado, Suzanne worked in Washington, D.C. for the National Wildlife Federation and as congressional staff for the Fisheries and Wildlife Subcommittee of the U.S. House of Representatives. Suzanne has an MS in Resource Policy and Management from the University of Michigan School of Natural Resource and a BS in National Resources from Cornell University. Zan, welcome. Thanks for being here tonight.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, and I appreciate you inviting me. And I'll just note, I got to say hi to Kathy Kilmer. We worked together at the Wilderness Society for many, many years. And so it's good to see an old friend. So I was going to share my screen, if that works, and show you some slides about a legislative effort that we're working on with lots of others. So I'm going to try to do that right now. Uh-oh.
Yep, I think I'm going to have to give you...
Okay, well, I'll start talking while you do that. Oh, here we go.
You should be
okay. All right. There we go. Do you guys see that? Does that work? Okay. So I want to talk to you about producer responsibility, which is a big legislative effort that we're working to, EcoCycle is working together with a lot of other folks, including Recycle Colorado, which is the big statewide association. And it is a transformative policy. It's a big step forward. And so I'll tell you a little bit about that. Jane shared a little bit about who EcoCycle is, but just so you know who I am, we are one of the few nonprofit recyclers left in the country, and we're one of the oldest and the largest, and we brought recycling to Boulder some 45 years ago and have been helping to build zero waste communities ever since. So we do that in a lot of ways, one of which is running the Boulder County Recycling Center and Boulder Center for Hard to Recycle Materials, but we also have our own fleet of trucks, teach in public schools, and we're down at the state legislature. So because you guys are focusing on climate, I wanted to reiterate the three main ways that zero waste intersects with climate. So the first and biggest way is simply that you save a lot of energy when you make when you take old materials and you use them to make new products. That's, yeah, a major way. So an old can, take an old can, make a new can out of it. Another important way is, has to do with landfills, which are the third highest source of methane in the country. And you probably know when you put organic waste like yard waste, food waste, cardboard, paper into a landfill and bury it, it creates methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. So recycling those materials or composting them or not using them in the first place saves a lot of emissions. And then finally, if you take organic waste and instead you compost it instead of landfilling it, it becomes a rich soil amendment. When you apply that to the landscape, you build healthier soils, which grow healthier plants, which pull down more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and store it as carbon in the soil. So these are all very powerful mechanisms. Just to underscore the recycling aspect, since that's the focus tonight of my talk, this is an example of the energy saved. For example, when you take an aluminum can and use it to make a new one, you save 92% of the energy, and so on. And energy saved is greenhouse gas emissions reduced. So the problem we are attempting to address at the legislature is the fact that Colorado's abysmal when it comes to recycling. So we are less than half the national average when it comes to diverting waste. We're at 15%, which means we're regularly burying materials that are worth something in landfills. So it's estimated we bury about 100 million cans and bottles and cardboard every year, which could be feedstock for new products and jobs. And one of the biggest reasons why we're bad at recycling, and there's a few, but one of the big ones is that most of Colorado does not have access to convenient recycling services. So for instance, only 45 out of the 270 some municipalities in Colorado actually guarantee recycling to single family households. And if you live in an apartment complex or you live in rural Colorado, you are even less serviced. So that's the problem we're attempting to solve. And the solution is producer responsibility. And what that is a coordinated statewide system that transfers the costs of recycling from residents and your local governments and puts it onto the producers of the stuff. And as a result, we're able to provide convenient access to recycling across the state. And as a consequence, we collect more of those recyclable materials, which then become feedstock, and we can build end markets here more locally and build circularity. And I'll just note that producer responsibility, while it's new to us, it's not new to the world. And the European Union and Canada have been doing it for decades. And it is finally come to the United States, and 2 states adopted it last year, Oregon and Maine. And Colorado is one of a handful that are actively considering it this session. So what it is like I mentioned, it's basically how do you pay for recycling? And it shifts it to the producers, and the system is managed by those producers with government oversight and an advisory board made of stakeholders. And how it works is producers are the brand names. So Coca-Cola, every bottle, every plastic bottle, every glass bottle they produce, how it would work is they would pay dues into this nonprofit producer responsibility organization, which would be the managing entity. And the dues are based on a per unit cost for every bottle they make and use every bottle they sell in Colorado. So, and it would be based on the type of material, the weight of the material. And then the PRO would manage the system and pay local governments, haulers, to provide the recycling so that you wouldn't have to pay for it, and neither would your community. And note that the bill will have exceptions for various business types, and I'd be happy to go into more detail if you want, but some of the exemptions are listed here. The gist of it is basically, so the big brands are paying for the system, and smaller local businesses, those with less than 5 million gross revenue, aren't paying into the system. And then there's some exemptions for marijuana, since they are regulated separately, and so on. So what would be covered in this is printed paper and packaging. So that's boxes, newspaper, magazines, tin cans, aluminum cans, etc. All of that would be included in the system. And the only stuff not included would be things like for pharmaceuticals, for business-to-business packaging, for long-term storage. So if you buy a CD, the CD case, it wouldn't be covered, but the wrap around the CD case would be. So the packaging would be, but not the thing. I'll just note that the producers would be paying for materials, whether they're recyclable or not, and they'd be paying more for non-recyclable materials. The idea being that would be an incentive for them to use recyclable materials and, frankly, to use less packaging. Some key elements of this system is, I mentioned before, but the whole idea is that the producers would 100% pay for it. It will be guided by a needs assessment that will be done if the bill passes this year, it would be done next year. That will kind of look at the whole state and look at the gaps in recycling infrastructure out in rural Colorado, or if you live in a community like Aurora that doesn't have curbside collections, what are the needs and what's it going to cost to stand up that system? And then the PRO comes up with a plan that's reviewed by an advisory board and approved by the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. A couple other key things is that we would end up with a statewide list, a universal list of what's going to be recyclable in Colorado, so that everywhere you should be able to recycle basic single stream items. And communities could go further than that, but at least that would be universal everywhere. And the standard would be that your recycling would be as convenient as trash. So if you live in a rural community where there's just a drop-off center for trash, that's where your recycling would be. If you live here in the Front Range, you'd get curbside collections along with your trash pickup. What was found in the European Union and Canada is it doesn't lead to consumer increase in cost for the consumer. It just ends up being a part of the cost of doing business, and it actually saves households money, it saves local government money. And it also, again, because it makes it easier to collect all these materials, Coca-Cola and other brands are able to better use old bottles to make new bottles, which a lot of them have those stated goals, but right now they don't have the feedstock to live up to those goals. And indeed, just to be clear, Coca-Cola is at the table with EcoCycle and Recycle Colorado in crafting and pushing for this program here in Colorado. Just to recap, there's a lot of benefits to producer responsibility. The whole idea is that it provides convenience and equitable access for everyone in the state to be able to recycle at no charge to them. So it'll increase recycling. It will also end up decreasing carbon emissions, as discussed earlier. So this bill hasn't been introduced yet. There's been a whole lot of negotiations. And as you can imagine, taking a big step like this involves lots of stakeholders meetings. And indeed, there's been a huge process for the last year and a half to get us to this point. The bill should be introduced next week, and we are urging folks to get involved. This website, recyclingforallcoloradans.org, has fact sheets. It has ways to get involved. It has sign-on letters if you are a business or if you're an environmental group, in order to indicate your support, etc. So if we're going to pass this year, and it will be a big step if we're able to, it's going to take a full court press. So that's, in a gist, that's what we are working on and what we hope to engage all of you in. So I hope I didn't go over my time, but that's.
No, that,
Okay.
That's beautiful. We've got some questions in
Okay.
the chat. And one of them was, what about reuse and refill bottles for things like glass bottles?
Okay, so reuse is encouraged and not, if you are a company that does reuse, then you're not paying for any of those materials.
Good to know. And what about thin film and expanded polystyrene?
So you will be paying for those kinds of packaging. Not all of those items will be able to be in the single stream bin, however, like plastic film, you can't send it to the recycling center, it gums up the works. But the producers would be paying for all the stuff all the packaging they produce, whether it's recyclable or not. Again, to encourage them to use less of it. And also, it would be a hard to recycle material. So it may be that it gets added to programs like that, but it won't be in the single stream bin.
Zan, will worse products cost manufacturers more? So will they have to pay more for foam and thin film and stuff that can't be recycled?
Yes.
Great.
And it's got a really horrible name. It's called eco-modulation. It should be called impact pricing, but that is one of the criteria that's in this bill that the producer responsibility organization will have to figure out how, once they do the needs assessment, figure out what's the system going to cost in Colorado to reach these goals, and then how do we charge accordingly with eco-modulation to achieve those goals.
Thank you. Another question is, what keeps the producers from passing the costs on to the consumer?
Well, so it will be fractions of a penny per unit item. So it's significant to the producer. As the consumer, your price per your Coke bottle is negligible. And so how it's manifested in the European Union and Canada is it hasn't increased cost to consumer. It is built into, it's basically you're taking an externality and internalizing it, if that means anything. And again, a lot of these brands are concerned, like Coca-Cola and Pepsi have received a lot of negative press for being, for all their products washing up on beaches around the world. And they are anxious to do better by their brand, but also to set up a system so they get those bottles back and use them to make new products. And they've committed to this, but now they don't have a mechanism to go there. So this is a long way of saying helping them get access to the feedstocks they need to meet their own goals will actually, in the long run, help them save money, especially if fossil fuel prices are high, like we're seeing now. It makes recycled content much more cost effective.
Right. And then another question is, who's sponsoring and what are the prospects for this year's passage?
So in the House, it's Lisa Cutter, who has been a sponsor of many of the recycling bills over the last few years. And in the House, it is Kevin Priola, he's a Republican, and Julie Gonzalez. So that's the team. Its prospects for passage are, well, we're doing, can I just say, I think we're doing everything right. There's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of stakeholder engagement. There's a lot building up to this moment, but it's a big step, and big steps often take multiple years. It's also an election year, which is not usually when legislators, especially legislators that are being redistricted, are as bold as normal. So I don't know, 50-50. It'll be a tough go, but so far we haven't hit. It's taken a little while to get it introduced because the leadership wanted us to work out all these accommodations for different industries, and that was part of the list of exemptions to make sure we're not harming small business as they come out of the pandemic, et cetera. Those sorts of things. So a lot of that has been worked out, but well, publicly, I'm going to say we have good shot, and but often these things take a couple years.
Thank you so much for all your work on this. And what kind of assignments can you give those of us who want to help with the cause?
Go to that website for all the fact sheets you need. What we would like, if you are supportive, is to contact your state legislator and let them know you are. When the bill gets introduced and there's hearings, feel free to testify. You can do that over Zoom. Write letters. If you are associated with local businesses who would be supportive, those are really important voices to hear. Yeah, those are some of the ways. And the get involved button on that website, and I can post the website if you want, has a lot of different ways. You can also sign up to get alerts on it. You can become an eco leader if you want to go deeper on these things and get trained on them. I think those are the basic ways we need you right now.
Great. Oh, another quick last question. Do you have the governor's buy-in?
We are in process of getting it. The governor has been supportive of the series of bills we've been passing over the last few years. You may know the first gentleman is really gung-ho recycler and composter, and comes to many of our press release or press conferences. So he hasn't said yes yet, but he hasn't said no yet. And so we are hoping to hear shortly that he's a yes.
Great, Zan, thank you so much. Thank you. This has been great information. We hope to see you again, and we'll keep you informed of what we're doing as well. We have another speaker tonight, Joyce Kennedy. She's the People and Pollinators Action Network's director and has worked with the group for over 5 years. She previously worked for the Wild and Scenic Rivers Division of the National Park Service in northeastern US. She loves to connect the dots between the importance of pollinator health to many other issues we face and provide hopeful solutions. So Joyce, we welcome you tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it's nice to see some folks I know here that I've worked with previously. So thanks for the invite. I am also going to share my screen here. Just give me a heads up or a thumbs up if it looks okay. Good, thank you. So People and Pollinators Action Network is an advocacy and education organization, and we're working across Colorado. We're working to improve policies to educate and promote sustainable land management practices, safeguard public health, preserve biodiversity, trying to make a safe haven for all who live here, from pollinators to people. We have had some success working at the state capitol alongside legislators. And some years back, we championed the designation of Colorado's first pollinator highway, I-76. And last year, we supported legislators in the creation of a new pollinator license plate. Last year, we felt would be such an unpredictable year with cities overwhelmed with COVID issues that we thought working on something non-controversial like a license plate would be a good path for raising awareness and for gaining funding for creating pollinator habitat. Here's a photo of the plate. We're hoping it will be available this summer, and proceeds from the plate will benefit pollinator conservation efforts. We hope to create a habitat fund and leverage additional dollars that can support work across the state. And this is a wonderful rendition of the Hunt's bumblebee, which is a Colorado native bee. We have great diversity of native bees in Colorado, almost 1,000 different kinds. I'm not doing a pollinator talk tonight, so just throw in that fact. And this is also a native flower, the Gaillardia. In preparing for this legislative session, we were thinking very broadly. And we wanted to propose something really ambitious and comprehensive that would start to take us in a more statewide sort of direction in terms of supporting pollinator health. Now, Zan also pointed out that this is ending up being a trickier year than expected. We were actually recommended by Senate leadership to go big, but some of the issues that were already pointed out are a bunch of environmental bills are running into some issues. What we were trying to do is have the most significant impact possible. And we want to make this connection between human and pollinator health, because we know if one benefits, the other benefits as well. So really showing the interconnectedness with this bill. We know we have enough information to act, and really time is of the essence regarding overall loss of biodiversity we're experiencing. And we can also make ties to climate change. Biodiversity really ranks right up there with the issue of climate change. I don't think it's as well known. So we're really trying to elevate that issue. There's a lot of interrelated factors. In the bill's introduced form, SB 22-131 included provisions to protect children's health, preserve pollinator biodiversity and habitat, and allow communities to make decisions about pesticide use that would better protect their unique resources and public health. There was some bipartisan support. We also had the Republican Priola on the bill, along with Senator Jaquez Lewis and Representatives Kipp and Froelich. The bad news is this bill has already died in the Senate Ag and Natural Resources in the first hearing. And we knew this was going to be a real stumbling block for us, and we hit it first. I'll mention some more reasons for this at the end, but first I'd like to give you an overview of the 5 components of the original bill as proposed. Again, like Zan said, it often takes more than one try, so we may pick up some of these efforts again, and we can work on them in other ways. It doesn't all have to be at the state level. There's lots of other things we can do. So I'm just gonna, I think pictures tell 1,000 words, so just showing you some nice pictures tonight here. The first component of the study, or of the bill, was a pollinator health study. It would have been commissioned through DNR, really to document the state of pollinator health in Colorado. What do we know currently about populations and health? What's the existing research? What are the gaps? What do we need to do to improve? Clearly, we need to have healthy ecosystems. So to be able to identify some of the specific causes, and then look at ways that those threats can be mitigated. And then also to think about what kind of outreach and education could really engage with the public and incentivize action. I will mention here that there's the chance of a late bill for just this portion, but it's kind of in limbo right now. And I'll just give you a moment to read this slide, because I think it's important as we talk about children's exposure to pesticides. So the next element of the bill would have banned the use of pesticides on school grounds. We know that chemical exposure, particularly in young people when bodies are developing and they're small, it's a critical time in their development. So these kinds of exposures, and they're particularly sensitive to them. PPAN did do a children's health webinar late last year where we went into a lot of those issues that can arise from these exposures. You can find that on People and Pollinators YouTube channel if you'd like to dig in a little deeper. I'll also say that I lived in Connecticut previously, and I did work on a similar bill there. It took like 3 or 4 years to get it through. It ended up being a ban from like preschool through middle school, never got it through high school. But there's just always that kind of pushback, like sport teams at the high school level need to have pristine turf to play on. So I know they've tried a couple of other times to get it through the high school level, but haven't been successful yet. This is the third element of the bill. You may know that many of our agricultural commodity crops are coated with neonicotinoids, or neonics for short. And this is a systemic insecticide that grows into all parts of a plant. And for instance, over 90% of the corn seed planted in the US is coated with neonics. And of course, there's lots of trouble for pollinators, human health. And showing this series of maps really illustrates the increased usage of neonics, this one being imidacloprid since 1994. A small percentage of the neonic grows into the plant, and the remainder ends up in soils. It doesn't break down. It's very soluble, so it gets into water courses, and the impacts are magnified. And the prophylactic use has really caused targeted pests to become resistant to this treatment, and it gets us on this continual treadmill of increased pesticide use. And as well, beneficial insects and pollinators are harmed and killed. So we create a further imbalance in the ecosystem. So what this element of the bill proposed was an approach, a voluntary approach, an ability to allow agricultural producers to test non-coated seeds. There would have been a financial incentive to trial the seeds on an acreage of their choosing at less risk. It can be difficult to convince farmers to take the risk of reduced yields or a pest threat, but it's important also to note that studies show that coated seeds have little benefit in arid climates like Colorado. So this program would have been pretty limited in scope, but the goal would be to try to create some cultural change, some peer-to-peer experiences. And so we imagine maybe farmers that are working hard to improve soil health might have been early adopters of a program like this. The next two sections of the bill are pesticide related, and they were individual bills in 2020, but they were both postponed indefinitely due to COVID. At the time, it seemed like they had some good success, chance of success. So we brought them back here. And this one was to ban non-agricultural uses of neonics by categorizing them as restricted use pesticides. And when we do that, we get them out of consumers' hands and off store shelves. So off the big box store shelves, out of hardware stores. And this can be a great benefit since we know casual users can overuse the chemicals and not follow pesticide labels. So that's important. And then also it would have banned ornamental uses because we know there's a lot of unnecessary use in lawns. And finally, the repeal of state level pesticide preemption would restore authority to local governments and communities to better protect people and the environment from pesticides. Currently, local communities do not have authority over regulating pesticide use. And so we wanted to give that option back, give that the expertise that shines through in local communities. And I do like to provide as an example, even though it's a really different issue, is that in 2021, the plastic preemption was repealed. So now communities have the ability to make some changes about plastic use locally. So we wanted to do something similar with pesticide use. Well, it's not easy, and we didn't make it through with this try. We know it takes a lot of voices and hard work to get it done. But we are concerned overall with the lack of interest at the state level in finding solutions to protect children's health and pollinator health and our ecosystems. And what we found was, even though we had agricultural exemptions in this bill and we worked hard with many stakeholders on other exemptions, in the end, the Senate committee nor were the opponents satisfied. And there were 9 hours of testimony on this bill. Over 90 people signed up to testify. More than half were opponents, but we had a really good turnout of about 40 people supporting the bill. And really, when it comes to pesticide restrictions, industry just doesn't want any limitations and refers to the slippery slope where any restriction is going to be the beginning of more. So it's hard to make changes when it comes to pesticide use in the state. And I will stop sharing and happy to answer any questions about the bill or the pushback we received.
So Joyce, that's really hard to hear after all the work and everything. And I know it doesn't happen easily and it doesn't happen every year, but first of all, thanks for all of your diligent work on all this. And thanks for making this so easy to understand, even though it's very complex and hard to describe. You did a really good job on that. There were a couple of questions. I'm going to ask Corinne to ask your question. Would you please?
I'm Corinne. As you were talking, I heard you use the words local communities, and I was just curious if that's referring to cities specifically or neighborhoods, or within that, who would have the power to restrict pesticide use and in what body or what type of area?
It would be at the city, or it could be at the county level as well, but really at the city or town level. So when I refer to local, that's what I mean.
Okay, thanks.
Sort of an uphill battle all the way around, right? So, and someone else, Tom asked, who are the opponents? Some of the opponents.
There's a lot of opponents to this. They mainly it's the pesticide industry, big ag, but then there's a lot of side industries like woodworkers, and then side industries of pesticide use like aerial pesticide users that spray over pesticides. Who else? I mean, those are the big ones.
Joyce, I have a question. I thought that our state government was predominantly Democrat now. And it's interesting for me to hear about things like this that you think a Democratic majority would support. Are you seeing resistance from both sides or just one side? Because we are having a political conversation here, right? We're talking about bills and lobbying and things like that.
Yeah, very astute. We do have a majority. We have this triumvirate, but it doesn't necessarily serve all bills well, environmental sorts of bills well. We had, I'm not going to say significant opposition from Democrats, but enough opposition that it died in committee, even though there was a majority of Democrats on this committee. I think depending on where Democrats are from and who they're representing, maybe Democrats in more ranching or ag districts are going to be less likely to support a bill that reduces pesticide use, even when you're exempting ag, as I continue to say. So, we worked hard to educate, but in the end, it just wasn't enough. It is very disappointing.
Yeah, it is.
Again, Joyce, thank you so much. We'll all keep following what you're doing, and hopefully, is there going to be a chance again next year?
Well, what's coming up next year is it's actually begun. There's a sunset review of the Pesticide Applicators Act. And that's ongoing right now. I don't know if you're familiar with what a sunset is, but essentially it's a process at the state government level where it's determined whether this legislation is still doing what it should. Is it still appropriate? What kinds of changes need to be made? And there's different intervals of when those sunsets happen. So that's what's being reviewed now. We will probably be focused on that, the review of that. And then it will, after the review, it will go through the legislative process next year. And yes, there's opportunities to speak up about that. I mean, same kind of process. You need lots of people testifying, people that are impacted, people on frontline communities that are most heavily impacted by pesticide use, farm workers, landscape workers. Yeah, so it would be great to have great representation about those sorts of human health issues, in addition to just how pesticides are being regulated currently.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all your information and your determination. It's good, very good. Our final speaker tonight is Joyce Kennedy. Oh, excuse me. We have a Jan and a Joyce and a Zan, so I'm a little. So Jan Rose, I apologize, is our third speaker tonight. She's a legislative analyst for the Colorado Coalition for a Livable Climate, which is a 43-member group of environmental, community, and religious organizations across the state. She was trained by Al Gore in climate science communications in 2017 and has been working on climate policy in Colorado ever since. She's testified countless times in support of good climate legislation and has been featured on all 4 major news stations for her opposition to new drilling permits. She's also a member of the Sierra Club Colorado, 350 Colorado, and the Conservation Colorado, and represented the chapter at several important regulatory hearings. Jan has an 9M solar arrays, organic garden. She's a double composter and is a public EV charging station and sends just 1 bag of trash a month to the landfill. Sadly, it's full of plastic packaging. Jan, take it over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I regret to inform you that if you were disappointed by Joyce Kennedy's presentation, you're really not going to like mine. Because mine is an overview of all of the climate, energy, and environmental legislation that is not happening at the state capitol this year. There is simply not a focus on environmental legislation this session. And I produce a weekly report on legislative status to the 43 member orgs of the CCLC. And those members, including Theron Makeley and Jeff Newman-Lee, have seen me grow from disappointed to frustrated to angry to shouting at our members and allies, because more than half of the legislation of the legislative session has taken place without a single climate bill being introduced. And I have not seen that in the 5 years that I have worked on climate, energy, and environmental legislation in Colorado. So it is extremely disappointing because we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on adaptation and mitigation and $0 on prevention. And this is how you get to 2 degrees. Is because you spend no money on prevention. So let me share my screen and we'll just get started with the bad news here. Make sure you can see it. Oh, it says allow Zoom to share your screen. Sorry, I didn't check. 1 second, I'm going to have to figure out how to allow Zoom to share my screen. There we go. Sorry, I have to unlock it. My apologies. I didn't realize I haven't given a presentation in so long. There we go. Believe it or not, I have to leave the meeting for this to happen. I'm so sorry. I will dial right back in and I'm completely embarrassed. Bear with me, it will take me 30 seconds.
Jane, I'm not sure if we want to do the waste services and then we can go back to Jan, or
No,
I
I
actually
think
have a
she- I-
general,
Go
I have a
ahead. I
general
think she's
question
coming
too.
right back.
okay, that I think we could talk about. Well, oh, here she is.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, I will try this again. Once again, apologies. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Please. Oh, there we go. You're one step ahead of me. Okay. All right, can everybody see that? Great. Okay, so I thought I'd take us through the four major components of looking at the entirety of a legislative session and look at bills that have passed, bills that have failed, bills that are still moving through the process and therefore can benefit from your participation by reaching out to your legislators. And then today we had a number of hearings that featured climate legislation. And so I have a slide on what happened today. So we have managed to pass one bill. That's it, one bill. And the bill allocated $2 million to our just transition workforce programs. As we shut down the coal plants in Colorado, we need to provide money to supplement the lost tax base, and we need to provide job training, relocation services, et cetera, to the former coal plant workers. We gave them $15 million last year, and we're adding another $2 million to the program this year. And it has been signed by the governor. It is law. So we have passed a bill. We have failed a number of bills, one of which, of course, was protect the health of pollinators and people. So I won't go into that one, but they're trying to replace the Pueblo old, the coal plant that's supposed to stay online the longest is in Pueblo. They're trying to replace that with a nuclear plant. So they ran a bill to do nukes in Colorado, and we successfully killed it. They ran a bill to prevent neighborhoods from banning LNG hookups. So we successfully killed that bill. We ran a regulatory requirement for employers over 100 employees to provide multimodal alternative forms of transportation other than single occupancy car trips for everybody to arrive at the company parking lot. Business fought back so hard that we canceled the regulation. And so the legislators got annoyed enough, yay legislators, to run a bill to give them tax incentives to offer these programs to their employees. And even with tax incentives to do so, it was shot down because it just might increase cost to business somehow, even with a tax break. We tried to pass a bill that you have to ask for plastic silverware, napkins, condiments, etc. Denver has already passed this ordinance, working well. Restaurants like it. People are accustomed to it. No big deal. Wouldn't fly. The sponsor had to withdraw the bill because she couldn't even get Democratic support. As someone pointed out earlier today, yes, the Democrats do control the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. The governor is being most recalcitrant this year. He is focused and announced in his State of the State address that he is all about saving people money. And so part of the reason that the Protect Pollinators bill failed is that Big Ag was successful at saying it would raise prices. And if it'll raise prices, then the governor will oppose it. And if the governor opposes it, then even the Democrats don't vote for the bill because they know it'll get vetoed in the end. We know that there are industrial plants that that spew a lot of hazardous chemicals. Everybody knows Suncor as one. The Goodyear tire plant in Pueblo is another one. There are, major industrial sources around the state. And so we tried to pass a law that in those geographic areas, we would do a better job of not only monitoring, but reducing hazardous air pollutants. And that one died. So it has been a very frustrating session in most of the committees because we only have a 1-vote majority in Senate Transportation and Energy. All we have to do is lose 1 Democratic vote and the bill fails. In the House, we have a 7-to-4 ratio generally in our committees. So we could even lose a couple Democrats and still get a bill passed. But in the Senate, we have a very slim majority, and we may lose that as a result of redistricting next year. So I want to reassure people when I talk about bills that have failed that we pass really big bills on odd numbered years because everybody has already been elected and nobody's up for re-election. On even numbered years, it gets harder. And this is why I am such a frustrated camper, because I do policy, not politics. In my mind, if you stand for climate, you ought to show it in your legislative history. And I don't think you deserve our votes if you're not willing to say, I stand for the planet. So that is why I've been increasingly strident as the weeks have gone on. That is, however, about to change. As Zan Jones just pointed out, we're about to roll out a significant number of great air quality bills and extended producer responsibility legislation, waste diversion, circular economy, useful things like that, that we expect to get passed this year, or we will have good reason to really take our legislators who are up for re-election to task. Okay, so what's still moving forward? What's still on the map that you can make a difference about? One of them is the electric grid resilience and reliability roadmap. We want microgrids in Colorado. We want neighborhoods to be able to get their own battery backups, put their own community solar in, and run their own mini grid when the power goes out. We want remote communities and high-risk communities that get cut off whenever there's a wildfire to have the ability to set up a remote generator in a fire station or a library or a hospital that can serve a small remote community where it may take their electricity provider weeks to get their electricity back up. So that bill has passed the most important House committee and is stuck in what is known as the parking lot. The parking lot is the Appropriations Committee because all of these bills take money to fund, and we are about to introduce the state's budget for next year. So while everybody's wrangling about the state's budget, we don't know if we have the money to fund these programs. So they have to get through committee, and then we have to wait to see if we can get them appropriated. And then they move on to the next body. So in the case of HB bills, that stands for a House bill. That means the bill starts in the House. And if it graduates, it moves on to the Senate. And if it graduates, it moves on to the governor's office. So you have the opportunity to talk to your state senator and tell them to pass the microgrids roadmap bill. Let's make sure that we provide a more resilient grid. We have maybe moved a bill on green hydrogen, meaning hydrogen that is only created from renewable energy sources. We may have passed committee, but something strange happened and they cut off testimony and they announced that it would only be for action only, and they took it off the calendar and it never came back. So it is my suspicion that it's faded away and we're not going to see it come back because, you know, the battle of our lives, if you're a climate activist, is the battle between green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is made from oil and gas sources, so it perpetuates the ongoing use of fossil fuels. We don't want that kind of hydrogen. One bill that passed the Senate, so it's an SB bill. And by the way, you will also notice that bills with 3 numbers are Senate bills and bills with 4 numbers are House bills. So if you ever hear somebody throw around something like 1261, you know that's a House bill. And if people are saying 181, the famous regulate oil and gas bill, that was a bill that originated in the Senate. So in the case of geothermal energy use, right, you can drill down, tap the 58-degree temperate zone in the earth and use it for heat pumps and even for generating electricity. So that bill did pass the Senate Transportation and Energy Committee, and it is now in the parking lot. So you will have a chance to reach out to your House representative and say, please vote yes on this carbon-free alternative to home heating and electricity. This is a busy slide, and I apologize, but we only have one big bill so far this year on climate legislation, and it is SB 22-138. It's a Senate bill. It's called Reduce Greenhouse Gas Emissions in Colorado, and it's designed to sort of find all the other buckets of greenhouse gases in the state and set limits on how much those emissions can be, and make sure that we're meeting our greenhouse gas reduction goals. So one of the great things, if you're into making insurance companies say, you know, how vulnerable businesses are to a climate risk assessment, then this bill requires you to publicly release that information so you can invest appropriately. It requires the public employees retirement account for all our public employees in the state to do its own climate risk assessment of its own investments. You may have caught the recent thing that surprised all of us, that we had $9 million invested in Russian banks in the public employees retirement account. So we had to divest when we sanctioned them. That's in the bill. There is interim targets. We are supposed to go from 26% reduction to 50% reduction in the years between 2025 and 2030. That's double the amount of reduction, and we have no idea how we're doing in those intervening 5 years. So we've set up an interim goal for 2028 to look at how we are progressing and get us back on track if we're not going to reach that 50% goal. And then again, we're supposed to go from 50% reduction to 100% reduction by 2050 with no interim look at how we're doing. So it adds that so that we have some additional roadmap breakpoints to look at our thing. There's a mention of anything that threatens to cost people money. We tried to phase out the sale of 2-stroke engines for lawn and garden equipment by 2030. So that after 2030, you couldn't buy a new gas-powered mower or a new gas-powered leaf blower, whatever. That got amended out of the bill because it might cost people money 8 years from now. So this could have made a big difference. It's shocking how much carbon gets spewed by lawn equipment. It's no longer in the bill. My 2 favorite sections of the bill are our first attempt to really get our ag industry on board by determining how to compensate farmers for sequestering carbon in the soil, for engaging in no-till farming, cover crops, biochar use, that kind of thing, to figure out a way to give them carbon credits for their contribution and for changing their farming practices, and also a grant and loan program so that we can expand the use of agrivoltaics, of growing crops underneath solar panels. As it gets harder and harder to grow crops in Colorado because it's too hot and the monsoon season is rapidly depleting, it's great to grow crops under the shade of solar panels and to use directional solar panels to have the rain run off those panels and irrigate your crops in a more direct way than if you were just counting on an afternoon rainfall. So all of those are pieces designed to sort of be holistic about reducing greenhouse gas emissions in Colorado. And I have confidence that it will pass. The sponsor is still working with the governor's office on carbon credits because the governor point blank said last session that he did not support carbon credits. He did not support a carbon cap and trade system in Colorado. So we kind of have, we kind of have an issue there. Another bill that's going through the House, we're awaiting its hearing schedule, is public protections from toxic air contaminants. I mentioned that we have several air quality bills moving forward here, and this is one of them. We only control 4 hazardous air pollutants in our state, and there are hundreds of them. So we want to expand hazardous air pollutants to be all toxic and hazardous substances that are emitted by industry, and this bill will do that. So that bill is awaiting a hearing. We want to make sure that multi-unit housing has charging stations. So moving forward, we want apartment buildings to, when they're built, have charging stations, and it phases in gradually so that by 2030, half of the occupants will have access to charging stations in multi-unit housing. So that's an exciting bill. Policies to reduce emissions from the built environment. We're giving everybody a 30% tax credit on the purchase of a heat pump, either air or ground source heat pump, to get rid of that LNG line. And we're also encouraging developers to use carbon-friendly versions of lumber, et cetera, of building materials. And then our final bill is, once again, another attempt to get employers to offer alternative transportation credits so that we can get some of these cars off the road. Because once we close the coal plants down, the transportation sector will be our largest source of emissions. And yay, 12% of new cars last year in Colorado were EVs. That's wonderful, but we need to get a lot further than that. So we're giving it one last shot. Finally, today I testified on the Species Conservation Trust Fund. We all know the web of life. Pollinators have proven that when the insects die, the birds die. When the birds die, and it moves up the web. And so that appropriates $6 million to help a lot of aquatic species and some wildlife species to help them thrive and survive in our changing climate. We have a very bad bill that wants to pay half the salary of the timber industry to go log more of our forest in Colorado, and tax incentives to sell beetle kill pine. And I looked up the cost of a beetle kill pine coffee table, and it was $1,640 for a beetle kill pine coffee table. And so I really don't think they need further tax credits to sell beetle kill products. So we are advocating that we do not want to promote wholesale timber increase in Colorado. The waste diversion and circular economy bill is moving forward. Zan could certainly take questions about that better than I can. And you'll see 4 bills on mitigating wildfires. Again, that's where the hundreds of millions of dollars in mitigation and adaptation are being committed, and all of those are moving forward as well. So you'll get a PDF of this if you choose to reach out to Jane, and she makes it available. And all of the things underlined are live links to the bill. So if one of them speaks to you, you can track its progress. You can see when it's up for a hearing. You can email your state senators or state representatives as the case may be. And you can testify on these bills, which would be fabulous. We need fresh voices. So today, we had 3 simultaneous climate bills. And I swear they did that on purpose to sort of divide us up so that we couldn't testify on all the bills because we can't be in all the hearings at the same time. The Senate Transportation and Energy Committee was canceled in its entirety today because they were voting on an election security bill until 3 p.m. That started this morning on the Senate floor. So the Senate just canceled the whole hearing and that bill will be rescheduled. I don't know how the timber bill went because I was in Senate Ag. So I will have to wait until tomorrow to hear whether the House Energy and Environment Committee approved the timber bill. The timber bill is an all Republican effort. And the House Energy and Environment Committee is 7 Dems, 4 Republicans. It is certainly my hope that it failed. And then finally next week, that big GHGs and agrivoltaics bill that I talked about is up in front of the Senate Finance Committee. We need fiscal testimony on how much this can save the ag industry, on the fact that the ag industry in Colorado is a $14 billion industry, blows the doors off the oil and gas industry in terms of how much it contributes to the state's economy. And so you can't testify on how great it is to reduce greenhouse gases, but you can testify on the monetary benefits in front of the Senate Finance Committee. And that is the world's quickest introduction to climate legislation this year. So I will stop sharing. Actually, I'll keep it up in case somebody has specific questions and I need to slide back to a previous slide.
Well, Jan, when Perry suggested that you come on because you have so much knowledge, that was an understatement. I'm just really happy to learn so much, and I can't get over how many things that you've got your mind going on a regular basis. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. So
yes, it's kind of my thing.
And I'll be happy to share your presentation with anybody that requests it. It's a sort of a piece in progress, which is always true about what's going on in the legislature. And it's nice to know somebody that has their finger on it all the time. And I'm going to come down and join you one of these days and follow you around if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great. And just again, if people do request the slides, you'll see that all of the committees are highlighted there with live links. When you click on the committee, they have a staffer email in the upper right corner of the committee page. And if you want to supply written testimony, you can just send an email to the staffer and they will distribute your written comments to all the members of the committee. So it's a lot easier than looking up committee members and writing each one. I urge you to use those links and to keep track of the bills you like and keep an eye peeled on the bills moving forward the next 4 weeks. And by all means, write your letters to the editor and say, this is not acceptable. We are running out of time to address the climate crisis. Okay, so questions.
I just have one thing. I think any of the speakers can talk about this, Jan. If it sounds you have brought this up right now, but I think there's a mix of people with different experiences on this call right now, and maybe there's some people that don't actually know that much about the testifying process and how they can go and testify before the legislature, and that it's really open to anyone. And I know this is an involved answer, but if we could, have a brief summary of how somebody can go about testifying for either one of your organizations or someone else, and how to do it through the legislature in an effective way.
Yes. I didn't include it in my slides, so I will look it up as soon as I stop sharing here and put it in the link. But you can testify remotely from the comfort of your home. So they offer all hearings are available on Zoom, and you can sign up to testify. They allow, if there's not a lot of people, the Pollinator bill had 90 people, everybody got 2 minutes to speak. You'd be surprised how fast 2 minutes goes. So I always tell people to prepare for 2 minutes of oral testimony. If you submit written testimony, it can be as long as you would like, but obviously the longer it is, the less likely they are to read it all. So to bullet out your reasons to support or oppose a bill is always a better way to communicate with your legislators. They are pushing a lot of paper this time of year. But with 2 minutes to testify, you simply say, this is who I am, this is where I live, I am testifying on my own behalf, and I support or oppose this bill. And then you get to spend about 1:30 minutes after doing that explaining why. And if you have a personal story, a reason why, let's say you're, like me, when I testified on species conservation, I'm a backpacker and I have lived in Colorado almost 40 years. And almost all the places I go that are close to tree line, there is a noticeable loss of sounds of pika and marmots. And I love pika and marmots. They're just so cute. And I miss them when the scree is silent as I'm hiking close to tree line. Likewise, the waters are warming and drying up. Drought is so severe that we're having problems with spawning of a lot of our angling fish because the shallows are too warm and the flows are too short term to sustain the species. So if you like to fish, that's what you want to talk to them about when you're talking about species conservation funding. So that in a nutshell is how easy it is to testify. About half of the people who testify have never done it before. So you will not be the only person who's new to this. And frankly, people like me, the Republicans get up and leave the room when they hear my name called because they already know how I'm going to come down on a bill. And, they don't want to hear what I have to say. So I cannot tell you how important and useful fresh voices are, especially this year when we're having such difficulty getting climate bills to pass. Fresh voices being adamant and just stating over and over and over again that we don't have enough time to mess around with this.
Jan, would you be willing to coach people on testifying?
I'd be happy to do that at some future meeting. I don't think we have the time for that tonight, but
No, not now. I'm talking about like
yeah, I'd certainly be happy to do that if you guys want to schedule something. The session ends on the 12th of May. So that's part of the reason why I'm starting to shout here when I send out my legislative updates, because we only have 5 weeks left to move new bills through all their hearings in the House, all their hearings in the Senate, to get passed on the House floor, passed on the Senate floor. And a lot of things can go wrong. So yes, I'd love to do that on the sooner side so that all of you can contribute. Do you want me to open up the chat and read the questions, or is somebody going to feed them to me?
That's great. And we can certainly, try to facilitate that as well.
What do you prefer?
Did you have any questions, Jane?
I'm reading through here. I'll see if I can get the slides in the chat here. So if you have another question, I guess raise your hand or.
I'll ask one more question. And you're awesome, Jan, by the way. Polis is up for re-election, and he seems like he thinks he's doing the right thing to get reelected, but probably not with this group. Is this could this potentially get a lot worse if he doesn't get reelected in terms of like bills, important bills not getting through approved? I imagine it would, but I just kind of want to see from your perspective.
Yeah, I'm going to be blunt because frankly, I don't know how to be anything other than blunt. I keep failing diplomacy school. So I'm going to, I really am a policy focused person, but everything that's going on here, every slide there represents the politics of the moment, the fact that it's an election year, the fact that there is, the highest inflation in 40 years, that gas and energy prices are very high, that we've had redistricting and everybody's districts have gotten shuffled, that we have a new congressional district. All of these things are making everybody walk on eggshells. And I probably, because I'm a policy person, think that's a bad approach. I think that if you want the progressive vote, you've got to give us a reason to want to see you get reelected. And being timid because you're trying to protect your voting base is, to me, not the wisest choice, but that explains why I flunked diplomacy school, right? So, yes, if Polis or another Democrat do not get reelected, then not only does all climate legislation stop, because everything passes on a party line vote in this legislature and has for the last 2 years. For example, the 2 Republican Senate leaders and the 2 Republican House leaders just introduced a joint resolution on how we love oil and gas. And oil and gas is so fabulous. And oil and gas gives us all these jobs. And oil and gas is our way of life. And that will be our future if we lose the governorship. We only have 3 seats to spare in the Senate, and we have many more competitive Senate districts this year than we did 2 years ago. If we lose the Senate majority, then when I was testifying on climate bills 3 years ago, when the Republicans ran the Senate Transportation and Energy Committee chair would not let us use the word explosion in our oil and gas testimony, even though the Firestone explosion had happened that year and had killed 2 members of a family. And when we refused to stop using the word explosions, he broke the law, frankly, and just gavelled the hearing to a close. And the rules of the legislature are that everybody who signed up to testify gets to testify, which is why the bill on abortion rights this year went for 26 hours. Because if you signed up to testify, the hearing is not allowed to close until everybody has had their 2 minutes to speak. So yes, I understand the timidity, I just don't accept it.
So Jen, if I'm hearing you right, we could filibuster a bill from
No,
a public
because
comment?
you get a timer, and the timer says that, the timer starts ticking down, and then the Senate chairperson cuts you off.
Right. No, I understand that. I'm saying if we had 1,000 people who each have 2 minutes, now we'd have 2,000 minutes.
That is correct. You are correct, sir.
I'm just waiting for Adam to jump in with
Yes. When we passed 181, the regulating oil and gas bill, the testimony went until 3 o'clock in the morning, and I testified next to the director of the Sierra Club. They sit 3 people at a table. This was before they did remote hearings, because they didn't do remote hearings till COVID came along.
Right.
And we both testified at 12:30 in the morning. We had been there since 1:30 that afternoon.
Okay.
And the oil and gas
Harmony, you
industry
have a
busts
question?
people in and out. Yes.
Harmony has her hand up.
I know, I was going to say, that doesn't look like Keith. That looks like Harmony Cummings.
He's got a lot more attractive. No, that's so Jan, I just think you're so wonderful, and thank you for all you do.
Thanks, Harmony.
If we're kind of sorry, Keith, love you. If we're kind of just like Polis is the best that we have. And I was at the NOCO hemp conference today, and I approached Jared Polis, and I said to him, I just saw Jan's daughter's documentary on water, and I said, you have all these innovators who want to do something with hemp, but our biggest obstacle for that is water here. And it blows my mind how we are jeopardizing our water source with producing oil and gas, in which more than 50% of it goes out of state. And it's just so and then his response to me, his rebuttal was something about electric vehicles. And my response back to him is that's still powered by oil and gas. And he said something about reducing coal. And I said, yeah, every time we reduce coal, we just increase natural gas. And I think he's an intelligent man. In fact, I was secretly recording our conversation and he watched me do that right as I started talking to him, because I need to get smoother at these sort of things. But I think he honestly believes that he is a climate champion.
Yes, he does believe that. And he believes that he did that year one. Year two, he passed healthcare. Year three, he passed education. This year, he's passing affordable housing and mental health and addiction support. And we are doing an outstanding job of addressing behavioral health issues. Universal pre-K appears that it's on its way to passage, and that means that we will solve a big problem in terms of returning to work post-COVID. So yeah, I mean, he has a very specific electoral plan, and this is not the year he plans for climate change, with the exception of air quality. And that is why there's a whole bunch of air quality bills. And to give credit where credit is due, when the budget does get negotiated, Polis has asked for $500 million to address our poor air quality in our state, including 50 new employees at CDPHE to model and monitor and report on air quality issues in the state. So that is his chosen climate focus for this year. And that's why we're having a heck of a time getting anything that's not air quality related through. So, it is what it is. And I don't know of any alternative to Governor Polis, who's on the ticket right now.
And my rebuttal to his $500 million in air quality is that your administration has approved 4,500 fracking sites in your time in office, and that's counterproductive to our air quality goals.
Yeah, and 9,200 new wells have been drilled or approved for drilling since Governor Polis took office.
Jan, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So do you think that I've been supporting the extended producer responsibility bill, and I know that's a heavy, heavy lift. Do you think that's a possibility? Like, what are your thoughts on where that will go?
I think there has, this bill has moved through a number of iterations over the past several weeks. I saw an early draft of it, and it does keep getting provisions removed, much the same way as the two-stroke engines got pulled out of the producer responsibility bill. And so I don't feel confident that it will pass this year, because the American Chemical Council has already pretty much laid its cards on the table and indicated that they will threaten us with a rise in the price of Tide and Dawn dishwashing liquid and, anything on the supermarket shelves made of plastic. And that will be enough to get the bill postponed until next session. But there are reasons that sometimes you introduce a bill, a big important bill like the producer responsibility bill, and you introduce it the year before, even sometimes 2 years before it passes. And that's not only to flesh out your supporters and opponents and their arguments, but also to set the stage so the passage becomes expected and easier the following year. And that's a policy reality. I myself am waiting on my own bill to be introduced to do an audit of soup to nuts of the oil and gas industry, from what they estimate their emissions to be before they get permitted, to what they actually report as emissions, to what they pay in taxes. Literally a full circle bill on the oil and gas industry. And half of the bill was about enforcing violations. If you cause a spill or accident, if you emit more than your permit allows, then you should pay a fine. And the entire enforcement section got stripped from the bill because oil and gas said it will raise the price of gas at the pump. So sometimes you have to tee things up and then you get to swing through and hit the hole the next session. And that's a legitimate tactic.
I hate to bring this wonderful discussion to a close. I just want to let people know that we said it would end at 8 o'clock. If you want to keep on, I'm fine with it. I just want to let people know that if you've been promised that you're going to be here till 8, that's great. Keith and I are happy to stay on. He was going to give a report back on our fee for waste services survey that we took. And so it's sort of Keith.
I also want to, let's do one more question too, Jane. Mariah.
Yeah, hi. So thank you all for all this information. I'm a junior at East High School and a part of DPS Students for Climate Action. And I wanted to offer some maybe uplifting perspective. It's easy to get pretty bogged down, but we've been working for the past year on some policy, some climate policy to pass through the DPS Board of Education. And we are on the agenda next month for it to be voted on and added as policy through the DPS Board of Education. So that is a small, hopeful victory. And I just want to thank and commend everyone here for all of this work. It's cool to see almost this like larger scale of work that happens. So yeah, thank you all. And I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you. And to all of you know, INC helps sponsor their work that they've been doing. So we're very proud of what these students have been doing.
Yeah, I also want to say that yay, Mariah, and frankly, the best voices, the most appreciated voices at the Capitol are the voices of our youth, because everybody knows that it's your future more than mine that's on the line, and they are sensitive to that. The younger, the better. They're like complete pushovers for grade schoolers. I gotta tell you. So it would be great if DPS organized a youth lobby day and went down there and really pushed for all of the areas of influence.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say, connecting with you. And I have all this information that I grabbed from the meeting to testify. We have a huge sustainability club and all sorts of student groups that we can pull from. If we want to organize with you guys and all go on the same day, we're happy to figure that out.
It would be my absolute delight to speak to your group, to prep you, to set up a lobby day, to run you through the Capitol and teach you how the whole thing works, and go bird dog legislators in their offices and do what's known as throwing cards on the floor where they're all discussing bills and you say, we are here to talk to you, and they come out and talk to you.
Yeah, we would love that. I'll definitely reach out to you, and it'll be a different email than my personal one, so my group members can also see it.
As long as it indicates that you're Mariah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, everybody.
Mariah, sorry to interrupt. I would love to connect with, sorry, real quick. Mariah, I would love to connect with you too. I am a mother of DPS students, and I don't know if you know this, but there's a climate strike marching to the Chase Bank right by East High School tomorrow around noon. And I know that's last minute, but it's the International Climate Strike Day. And so if you don't know anything about that, I would love to connect with you. And I know it's last minute, but I would love to connect with you on future things as well.
Yeah, I will put my email in the chat.
And I want to be respectful of your agenda. So, and perhaps Zan would like to give a better summary of how she feels EPR is going to do this year than my rather dour one.
No, you are remarkably direct and honest, and yes, it will be an uphill battle, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
To,
and it'll pay off next year.
Tilt at the windmills if it, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I also put in the chat about Denver pay-as-you-throw efforts, which is something EcoCycle is working on, probably with many of you, I don't know. But our organizer asked me to pitch the meeting in the chat. So it's next week if folks are interested.
Thanks. Well, thank you for all of the presenters that presented tonight. This was an amazing amount of information. And thank you for all the work you do as well at the state capitol. It's very appreciated. And hopefully we can have y'all back and get some further information about how these are doing down the road as well too. I'm just going to wrap up for tonight. So I will say, if anybody's about to hop off, feel free if you need to. I'm going to do just about 5 minutes on the results from our survey that ended on the 22nd. So just a couple of days ago. We're also going to do these results at the next Inc. delegate meeting, which is going to be the second Saturday in April. We'll talk about that along with the city, who's going to talk more about the expanded waste services proposal as well. I do just want to tell folks that it's in the agenda when our next meeting is. And the way that we've decided to do this, at least for the next 6 months or so, is that we're going to try to have a larger meetings like this with speakers every other month. And then on the off months, we're actually going to have we're going to have meetings still, but we're going to have breakout groups around certain issues and different neighborhood efforts. And it'll really allow folks an opportunity to get a chance to know one another and also work with each other on ideas and focus areas around different sustainability and climate issues that you're passionate about. So we're going to have a meeting again in April. It's always going to be the fourth Thursday at 6:30. Online for now, and then we'll just kind of see how things go in terms of getting together and meeting. Is that all the details, Jane?
I think so.
Okay.
I think that sounds
Well,
good.
I'll share my screen. Let's see if everybody can see it. Can you all see it? Great. Perfect. So about a month and a half ago, I think we got together and said that we thought one thing that we could do as a committee in terms of, we had a presentation from the Kasser office in February, I'm sorry, to all the Inc. delegates at one of our delegate meetings about the expanded waste services proposal that's been talked about for about 20 years. Pay as you throw is another name for it. And we thought one thing we could do as a committee was send out a survey to RNOs and community organizations about how, trying to frame it in a way that we were relaying the climate focus of the work that's trying to be done, so that both organizations and neighborhoods and residents could understand why the city is trying to do this expanded waste services in the first place. And then we could, get the opinions of neighbors and residents about how they feel about this, and share those results with, city leaders, neighborhood leaders as well. So what we did was, well, now I'm not, all right, let's see. Okay, so we sent out, we created an online survey that consisted of about 4 questions. And we sent those out to RNOs, community lists. We sent to local media sources and council district offices. And we just said, hey, we've created this survey. It's not going to be an academic survey, but please send it out to your lists and we'll see what kind of response we get. So the results that we got were about 336 survey responses. And of those 336, 235 people, we had 3 basic questions, and then we had a 4th question where we asked people to just write in answers or questions they had about this. And we thought that was a really good way to find out what residents didn't know about this expanded waste services proposal. And we were just floored by the number of written answers that we got to this. We also asked if people rented or owned, and 92% of the people that responded to this survey were homeowners. The first question that we had was basically kind of explaining what diversion is and how towns around Denver, there's many towns around Denver that do a better job with diversion than Denver does. And how important is this to folks? We asked, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this to you? And we got this response, which was, 62% of the people rated it as very important. And another 9 and 8% rated it as highly important. So that's basically almost 80% of the respondents to the survey felt that climate change and diverting waste to help fight climate change was very important to them. We asked if most towns around Denver charged a fee, would you be willing to pay a fee as well? And from that, we got 75% of the people said that they would be willing to pay a small fee for their trash if they got free composting and recycling. So we thought that was a pretty good indicator to share with the city as well. Our last question was basically, if you get free composting and you get free recycling, but you have to pay for your trash, how much would you be willing to pay for your trash? And this is pretty telling as well. I think basically it comes out to about over 70% of people would pay at least $10 a month for trash services if that would have an effect on climate change and meeting Denver's climate goals, which we thought was pretty significant. And we also included information that there would be a rebate for for low-income residents, which we felt was important too. And then I talked about this earlier. We asked, do you have anything else to share? We got 235 written answers. And those ran anywhere from, people having questions about contamination, cross-contamination, bin size, how frequent is recycling pickup going to be? Is this really a double fee? There was a lot of responses that talked about multi-unit buildings and their fact that they're not going to be part of this program. And then, we had other issues that came up like bin placement and alleys. So we think this is all really good information that we can share with city leaders as well. And so we'll talk more about this at the delegate meeting, but we just wanted to kind of share this information with everybody on where we were at with our responses to this survey.
And Keith, I put in the chat that we will have a presentation from Charlotte Pitt at that April 9th meeting. So you can all attend.
Yeah, that would be great.
And get more details on that, and you'll be able to grill her with questions. She's bringing some reinforcements from Dottie also, so it should be a good presentation.
Great. And if you have anything else that you want to ask or comment about this, feel free. Again, in the agenda, both Jane and my email addresses are in there, and we're happy to chat with whoever. On that note, Jane, do we want to wrap it up?
Yes, sorry, I just had to run get a glass of water. I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight again, for the wonderful information you shared with us. You've given us all a lot of challenges to help you with these important legislative pieces. And I think it's important for all of us to talk to our friends and just help them understand this is how the way the world works. And we got to get a little bit more involved, or we're going to be, subject to the climate that we don't want. And for those of us, have kids, have grandkids, and, it's going to be a harder time for our next generation. So we really have to be involved every day. And thanks to all of you for coming tonight. Great questions, great input. Hope to see you another time. Good night.